Welcome to my Israel update. This week, this is John Haller. I'm here with Daniel Seaman. Daniel Seaman is currently with the Israeli Defense and Security Forum. And Danny, why don't you just give a little bit about your background, what you've been doing, how long you've lived in Israel, that sort of thing.
Well, if we go way back, as you can tell by my accent, I'm American born. My dad was in the Air Force. My mom met him in Germany. My mom is Israeli. I was born in Germany. I spent the first 10 years of my life I was an Air Force brat, so I went from one military base to the other. Then when my dad finished his service, my mom said, well, why don't we try out Israel? So to me, this was back 53 years ago. I was 10 years old, and we moved to Israel. And so it was very strange to me to be in a place where everybody is Jewish. I used to be, always thought I was the only Jewish kid in the schools. I went to public schools in the South. So we moved to Israel. I then, 8 years later, enlisted like every Israeli. It's mandatory, compulsory service. I served in the paratroopers for 3 years, fought in the first Lebanon War in Israel. I then, when I completed my service, I came to the States, started working at the Israeli consulate over 40 years ago. Worked there in public diplomacy for the state of Israel. I went to school in New York to Hunter College and came back to Israel, began working at the Prime Minister's office with the government press office. It's the branch of the Prime Minister that works with the foreign press in Israel. We have a lot of foreign press here. It was sort of dropped down in the past decade, but is now obviously due to current events back up again to the usual numbers that I dealt with back then. After a few years, I became the director of the government press office and headed the department. I worked under 6 different prime ministers. And the last years working with Prime Minister Netanyahu, who I knew from when I worked at the consulate. He was the ambassador to the UN, so I knew him from there. Completed my government service as the Deputy Director General of the Ministry of Public Diplomacy, which is very much an area of the international battlefield, the cognitive warfare, as we call it. And retired about 10 years ago, and since been working in different projects, and now with the Israel Defense and Security Forum, which is an organization, a movement of former military officials, government officials, former Israeli diplomats, promoting a very strong Zionist message for the state of Israel, believing that Israel should depend on itself, by itself, and continue standing up for the state of Israel, and a very strong Zionist message. So that's my background, more or less.
Great. And I would also recommend anybody that's listening that you can go to the IDSF website, which I think is idsf.org.il.
Exactly.
And you can sign up there for the daily briefings, which happen Monday through Thursday at 10 a.m. Eastern here in the United States.
Right.
I've interviewed General Amir Avivi, the founder of IDSF, a couple of times and done a little bit of work with them, and Danny's been with them for a while. So I highly recommend that you watch those daily briefings, because you will get a very wide spectrum view of the situation in Israel and the impact that it's having, and very, very informative. And they are much better than I am in limiting things to 30 minutes. They've done a great job on that. So anyway, so Danny, appreciate you coming on today. Tell us a little bit about just the current situation in Israel right now, particularly the war down in Gaza.
Well, today we woke up I believe the first time since October 7th to some good news. It's all relative, mind you, but in this case was the first time we had a successful operation by the IDF in the Rafah area there, by the way. In the Rafah area, which we've been asked and sort of pushed not to go into. That's the one area left in Gaza that we haven't moved into yet. This morning, we woke up to the news that the IDF, in a very, they haven't given all the details yet, but a very complex operation, were able to free 2 of the hostages and bring them home safely. In the process, we killed over 100 Hamas terrorists in the vicinity without losing any of our soldiers. There were 2 casualties yesterday in another area of the Gaza Strip to the IDF, but not in this particular operation. Today was a good day, though we've been very successful in the operation there since October 7th. But the main goal of freeing the hostages, right now 130 some hostages, And I use the number because there's been news that many of them may have been killed in the meantime. But we know that still the Hamas holds 136 Israelis to this moment. So 2 of them were released yesterday by the IDF, and this was good news. The IDF continues with its operation now, though there's less aerial bombings and less artillery bombings and less tank corps. It's more complex, very complex. An American expert at your school in West Point, who's an expert in urban warfare, was here just last week, and he stated that Israel is fighting a war right now that is unlike anything that the Western world has fought, and has been extremely successful, but it's extremely complex. It's underground tunnels that we believe are anywhere between 500 to 750 kilometers of underground tunnels. This, by the way, is greater than the subway system in New York. And we've had success in there just this week. Under a UNRWA facility, we were able to find the collection of their intelligence, which was the core of their computers, the core of the power for those computers. And this gives us invaluable information and intelligence on what's going on, where they're located at. We know that they're all now down. Most of them are down in the Rafah area. Just so you get a perspective, when we talk about the Gaza Strip, it's a little bigger than Manhattan. So it's not small, and it's a lot of buildings. And by the way, another one of the things have been said that the Gaza Strip is the most densely populated area in the world. Manhattan is more densely populated. Another one of the lies that you're being force-fed to create some kind of impression of a horrible situation that they're in. So we have been able to go all the way down from the north of Gaza, which is closest to the cities in Israel. And you can see on the map here that you're showing the Gaza Strip. We've been able to move all the way towards the border with Egypt, which is on the southern end, on the bottom of this map here. And the town of Rafah is the last location now where they're holed up. And there are 2 brigades left from the Hamas. We've been able to eliminate almost all of them, except for these 2. And this is closest to the border with Egypt. Egypt have been not very pleased of us moving there, but we made it very clear. This is going to be the final. Anybody following news in Israel for the past 20 years knows that there have been ongoing operations that flared up from time to time over the past 20 years, although Israel withdrew from the Gaza Strip completely. And we've always been told in the years, if you recognize the PLO, which we did, and if you leave territories, there'll be peace. Not only was there not peace with them, and by the way, I include the PLO in this because they've also been involved in cooperating with Hamas. But Hamas controlled the Gaza Strip, which Israel was not physically in there, and they used it as a launching base, not only of missiles, but also terrorist attacks against Israel. And we've had enough. And after the assault on October 7th and the barbarism of October 7th, Israel has sworn to eliminate Hamas in its entirety and destroy any basis that they have there for launching attacks against Israel. The complexity of it is such as that even in the areas that we have moved into and taken total control of, they still have these underground tunnels coming in and out. So hopefully the intelligence we gathered from these computers that we took captive, were able to take a hold of the other day, will now give us the exact locations, and we'll be able to eliminate all their whatever's left of their presence in the northern and central area of Gaza, and then focus on the leaders of the Hamas, which are holed up in the Rafah area, and destroy that and bring a rapid end to this. But it could take a while, several months even, but we're not backing off. And it's not the prime minister. I read in the American media, I'll say very clearly, in the left-wing media, the mainstream media, as you call it, they think that if they put pressure, apply pressure, or this is something has to do, and they're very quick to say what the tensions between Biden and the Prime Minister of Israel, Netanyahu. Netanyahu was elected by the people of Israel, and the people of Israel have had enough. And after October 7th, we've made it very clear we want to put an end. And we say even more than this. This has been, what happened October 7th was the worst incident that Israel had to deal with since the Holocaust. But if you look at, and Jews have gone through pogroms in Europe and the Arab world for years and generations, even before the Holocaust. If you look at those events, none of these pogroms that we went through in Europe, in Eastern Europe, in Arab countries over the years, none of them were as bad as what happened on October 7th as far as the loss of life. The barbarism and the atrocities were similar, but the numbers were extensive and heartbreaking. The state of Israel was created precisely to prevent something like that from happening. So when we say never again is now. And it's very clear to us what Hamas intends to do. They're not hiding it. They're not shying away from it. So that's what we're doing right now. And Netanyahu is fulfilling what the people of Israel want him to do. And so the American media and the president can be displeased about this, but we're going to eradicate and eliminate the Hamas, just like any one of you, anyone watching this right now who would understand that you have a threat against your family, against your children, against your women, against yourselves, you would not tolerate that. So we're very much in the same venue right now. We are going to destroy because the people of Israel want the government to do this. And because we know that if we don't do this now, it'll end up being worse the next time. And there will be a next time because they promise us this. And they're saying to them, this is a great event in the history of Islam. We have to make it clear to them that they may be celebrating, and they celebrated October 7th, but they doomed themselves to what is happening right now.
So let me go back to October 7th, and just to get a little bit of your personal experience and your family, and how did you find out what was happening, and how has it impacted you over the last 4.5 months now almost?
Well, it's interesting. The day before was October 6th, and that was the anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. And I told here how I arrived in Israel. I arrived in Israel as a child. I was 10 years old in 1971. 2.5 years later, we had the Yom Kippur War, which erupted on October 6th. And that day was the 50th anniversary this year. And I was telling my kids, telling them my experience from back when I was around my youngest age. And I was telling him how that afternoon, it was Yom Kippur, it was all silent. My dad wasn't very observant, so he was listening to the radio and he was listening to the BBC. And around 2:00 in the afternoon, he tells us, "Oh my God, there's war broke out with Egypt." And we're saying, "Dad, what is crazy? What's going on?" And suddenly the sirens go off, and we were relatively new in Israel. We were shocked by all of this. We had to go down into the shelter, and then you had this whole war erupt. And I was sharing my kids with this story and my experience. The next morning, 8:30 in the morning, it's Shabbat. It's a holiday for a Sukkot holiday. And I wake up to the sound of sirens. Now, we live in Jerusalem. So usually Jerusalem, it's even when we had these operations, very, very, usually we didn't have sirens. We had a few sirens, but Jerusalem is usually on the outskirts of things. We have other problems with terrorism, but the missiles, usually when there's missiles or aircraft involved, you get the sirens. Suddenly we have sirens, 8:30 in the morning. And I grew up in Ashkelon. Ashkelon is just north of the border with Gaza, very close to the Gaza Strip. So my family are still there. So, and they're usually under these attacks and sirens. They're very experienced with this. So the first thing I do is call my family, because if we're getting hit by missiles in Jerusalem, they probably have gone through this. And I call up my sister. I said to my sister, "Oh, good morning to you. Where have you been for the past 2 hours?" I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "We've been under the worst attacks ever since 6:30 in the morning." So I know something was unusual, and something, especially if Jerusalem is usually hit, it's usually at the escalation of things. So here, in the first thing in the morning, so this was very unusual. So I start going into social media, and I have Arab friends who were telling me over the years, you have to watch Arab social media to understand what's going on. You guys are living in some kind of dream world. You don't understand what is here. We're preparing for some big event. So the Arabs knew this was going on. So I immediately go to these Arab language social media outlets, and I'm seeing them celebrating and the invasion. We didn't even know what was going on. And I'm looking at these videos of them from the kibbutzim, from around the Gaza area, from Sderot, shooting going on, executions, everything that many people have seen now. So it was quite clear that it was a totally different event. To me, yes, the biggest event since the Yom Kippur War, and what we've been through The Lebanon War, 2 wars in Lebanon. There have been suicide bombings here in Jerusalem. There was the first Gulf War, which we were hit by missiles, and the second Gulf War. So we have a lot of experience with these things, but nothing was similar to this. A very painful event happened. My daughter had just joined the military as well. I had a son in the paratroopers. He was supposed to finish his mandatory service 2 months away, but in the paratroopers, he's also in the paratroopers, joined the same unit I was with in the paratroopers. And he left that the week before to finish his service, and then you get 2 months vacation before you complete your service. So I call him up. He said, "Dad, we were preparing for a battalion exercise. They've got us all. We were ready for the exercise, so we're all fit. We're all ready. They were about to helicopter them down from the center of Israel down to the Gaza Strip." Said, "I can't talk. We're moving in," which I understood what that meant. My daughter was at home. She was also just joined the military a month before. She's looking at the videos, and she's saying to me, and I get chills thinking about this, it's the infamous image of the young woman being dragged out of a Jeep by her hair. Everybody knows her. Her name is Naama Levy. Was a friend of my daughter's. Sorry.
It's fine, Danny.
My daughter is saying to me, "This is Naama." I say, "No, you must be wrong. It can't be." She says, "No, she joined 2 days before. She had been one of the women observers along the border. Just 2 days before that, she joined them." And she calls her friends, and these kids, they'd spent the year together in a pre-military school in the south of Israel, a preparatory school for the military service. And she sees a friend of hers, and I can't take that image out of my mind because she's my daughter's age. She's a friend of my daughter's. I know the family. So it hit home very quickly that this, again, is something beyond anything. And Naama is still being held. I have no information whether she's alive or not. 19-year-old girl.
She's the one, the image, the video, she was they put on the back of a motorcycle and took
No,
her away.
she's not with the motorcycle. She's with the Jeep being pulled by her hair from the Jeep.
Okay, that one. Okay.
And you can see very clearly that she was not only raped, she was defiled. The blood in her pants and all. And she was a young girl who was always involved in peace events. And she would spend every summer in a camp with Palestinian kids. And she was all for, and every weekend, and her parents were all for peace and coexistence. So it's even more painful when you know this innocent young woman who believed in coexistence, they didn't care. And that's so that day, the more stories coming up were very clear that they didn't stop to ask if you were Jewish or not, because they even attacked Muslims that day. They attacked Christians who were foreign workers in the kibbutzim and the moshavim, the farms in the area there, who were not Jewish. They didn't ask you if you were right wing, left wing, if you were pro peace, against peace. They were on a murder frenzy of just killing anybody who's not them, and taking the lives of babies and all the atrocities that we hear. So it became very personal, and every Israeli knows somebody there. Later that afternoon, we heard, as I said, my family's in Ashkelon, so I would go, and for many years I played soccer on the weekends there and had friends, and two of the guys that we played with, their sister was missing. She was at the Nova Festival. She was murdered that day. We only found out 2 weeks, it took 2 weeks to identify her body, which was, we say luckily, she was immediately executed, but they burned the body. And I knew her since she was 8 years old, 20 years ago. She was this young kid coming with her brothers to the field. And every Israeli knows somebody who was killed that day or somebody being held. So it struck home very personally to every single one of us. And these are images that we grew up commemorating the Holocaust, and images that we know from back then. And it's not only the execution, it's the viciousness, it's the burning of babies, putting a baby in an oven. It's the execution. And I saw many of these things going on live, because they were not hiding it. So anybody saying that today is collaborating with the Hamas. and with this evil, because this is what it's down to. It's evil versus good versus evil. And anybody siding with them, anybody in any way excusing this kind of behavior, there is no excuse for that. There is no excuse for what they did that day, because all they care about was killing babies, the innocent. Okay, so let's say there was occupation and there was, fine, you were not occupied. You were not occupied at that time. We left the Gaza Strip 20 years ago. We left it and we left them in control. And they used it as a basis. And there was more money was going in the past 20 years to the Gaza Strip than any of the money spent in the Marshall Plan after World War II in Europe. And all this money was spent. And we know that there's UNRWA there, and UNRWA, which is a UN organization. We find now that they were collaborating, and over several thousand of the members were Hamas activists. We know that Al Jazeera, today their correspondent, in the intelligence we gathered from what I told you before, the intelligence we gathered from their computers the other day, one of the first things that came out was a computer of the Hamas activist who is an Al Jazeera correspondent in the Gaza Strip. Al Jazeera is funded by Qatar, and Qatar are the main funders of Hamas. And they're one of the main promoters of the world jihad movement. And jihadists are not only against Israel, we're just the closest to them. They're against anybody who is not Islam. So this is greater than just Israel. And so we're on the front line of this. We've been facing this for over 4 months now. I'm happy to say my son, though being in the thick of battle, has completed his service. He also volunteered for an additional, it was extended for a period, and then he decided to volunteer for another month. He finally came home 10 days ago, was released from his active duty, and he will be back in reserves within a few months, but because we know this is going to continue. So in that sense, we've been very fortunate, and we're very grateful to God for protecting us and watching over our family. But every day is, wake up now less than in the beginning. Beginning every day, there were soldiers who fell in combat, people who were injured. We know people from the neighborhood here, friends who've lost children, their sons and daughters in many incidents. So it's an ongoing thing. We haven't, as a nation, haven't really mourned yet. We carry the pain. We carry the weight of what happens every day, knowing that things are not going to be easy for a long time. But at the same time, we're not helpless, and we're no longer the helpless victims that Jews have been for many, and we're very grateful for that. And by the way, very grateful for the support of the American people. The United States administration, we give them a lot of credit. People may be critical of them, but in this case, the President Biden and his administration stood up and supported the state of Israel immediately, understanding not only for the friendship of Israel, but also understanding it's an American interest that we defeat this evil. And since its inception, the United States has been a force of good against evil, and they continue doing it now, and setting the tone for the Western world. And it very much set the tone for a lot of them. And I think Hamas, when they over the past 20 years, they saw, and I worked with government, as I said, with the Prime Minister's office. We always knew that there was the clock ticking. The moment we go into an operation, there's a period of time, because many of the European countries, the United States as well now, that have very significant Muslim populations that have left as refugees from a lot of these Muslim countries, and have come to the Western world, instead of adopting the Western values, continue with their values, which are supporting terrorism. So we knew there would be pressure up until this year with Europe. They give us a few days, but then the demonstrations going on in their countries would limit the ability of Israel to continue defending itself. And this always happened. So Hamas sort of hoped that this would continue. And at some point, they would tie our hands behind our backs so that the Western world, so we couldn't do what we're doing at the moment. They miscalculated. Even though there is some attempts by Europeans, the United States now, or perhaps we should tone it down. No, we can't do this, because we know right now, and the Hamas has said it very clearly, it's us or them. It's not against the occupation. They said that they were in an open-air prison, and very ironically, they are now mourning what Gaza was before the 7th of October. And look what Israel did, but I thought this was a prison. So how did you have all this luxury? So the discrepancies in their description of what is going on. But they believed that we would be held back by the Western world. This is not happening, and it won't happen because we have no choice. We have no choice. So we realize that we know we're in this for the long haul. We are going to destroy Hamas because, as they said, there are two things here. It's us or it's them. And we know we're not going to give in. And the second thing is never again is exactly now.
So tell me a little bit about, I know IDSF is not is sort of a nonpartisan organization, but how is the political situation in Israel right now with the war cabinet and the coalitions that have formed to govern the war? How's that holding together right now from your perspective?
I sort of laugh because you have to, because if you know what's going on and what had been going on in Israel before, the United States are facing similar things between the right-wing ideology and the branding of it as extremism and as not as conservative, but as fascism and you're going through a lot of the same things going on with the same type of people.
Right.
This is the biggest battle right now, the ideological battle that the West faces. And by the way, it's not conservative versus liberalism. It's Western values. I would say even more than that, the Judeo-Christian values of the Western world, which gave us all the liberal values of democracy, freedom of speech, the respect of other opinions, etc. The core of that battle right now is between those values and the values of Marxism, jihadism, and all these things that don't appreciate the freedoms that the United States was created upon, the freedoms and the ideas, the concepts that dwell from the Bible. And I'm by no means a religious person, but I do see that the Bible that was given to us, whether by the message of God or not, I don't want to even go into that at the moment. The fact is that it exists, and it's there. And it has been the essence and the anchor of Western civilization since after the Dark Ages and until today. And there are forces who don't want that to be, and they're fighting that. And unfortunately, they've been able to cause havoc in the United States as well. So here in Israel, we face that being immediately anybody who has some kind of religious affiliation being branded as a fascist, anybody who's conservative and upholds conservative values also being illegal. And so when this government in Israel was elected democratically, overwhelmingly last year, or a year and 3 months ago, you had these same forces trying to delegitimize them and hooking on into everything. And here it was the legal battle, the fact that the Israeli elites who took over the legal division of our government, one of the legal branch of our government, and tried, and it's not even hiding it anymore, it's trying to upset the balance of powers here. Fortunately, you had the Israeli media along with this. So there was a very strong battle, which also had religious ramifications. They were fighting against the religious observance. Now, even Israelis like myself who are not observant, we respect Judaism, and I observe certain holidays, certainly Yom Kippur. A week before the war breaking out, there were battles, physical battles going on in the streets of Israel, as non-observant Jews tried to prevent those who were, and I don't even want to say observant, because religious, because it was beyond religious. It was anybody who respects the holiday like myself. On Yom Kippur, the most holiest day in Judaism, we're preventing them from holding services in the streets. Now, if this happened anywhere outside of Israel, it would be branded as anti-Semitic events. So that's how extreme the incidents became. And I mentioned that because I go back to what I said, that when Hamas attacked us on October 7th, and this is very much goes back to the same suicide bombings that we had back 20 years ago, when they got on buses, when they entered restaurants, and when they attacked us on October 7th, I go back to what I said before. Nobody stopped and asked us, are you right-wing, left-wing, conservative, reform, observant, not observant? They didn't care. And that's what we had to realize. Many of us have realized that. And there is a big movement of unity here in Israel, of solidarity, of standing together. I used to say this as a combat soldier myself. I never knew and never cared what my political beliefs of my friends were in the battlefield until this day, 40 years later. There's a brotherhood. And I say that Mike Oren, who many of you may know as the former ambassador, Mike and I served in the same company together. I say that there's no greater bond between two heterosexual men than two guys that serve together in the same company. Only guys who went through this knows that bond that you have and this brotherhood that you have. And it goes, the differences don't matter. It's that you serve together. And the same way as there are no atheists in the foxhole, this also happened in Israel. My son comes back. As I said, we're non-observant family. We're very Jewish and observe Judaism, but not really religious. My son comes back with the religious cloth beneath the clothing that the Jews have as the tzitzit. So all of them were wearing this. They know the prayers. We had our first Sabbath together. We always have a family Sabbath, and we say the prayers, and he was reciting it with great conviction. And I'm very happy to see this, and a lot of us see. And over 60% of the Israeli population polled just a few weeks ago said that they are much more observant now and more stronger in their religious beliefs, which is always something good. It gives you direction and values, and more patriotic today. There are still, unfortunately, in the media, voices who try to create dissent, but the public are having nothing of it and are speaking out strongly against it right now. So, and I see that also the IDSF is gaining a lot of support and momentum as a movement in Israel, because it has always been apolitical, talking about unity in Israel, but also identifying threats. And just last year, you mentioned General Avivi, we have a research division that just last January gave in the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee in Israel, gave a briefing saying that we are going to war. The Hamas, Hezbollah do want to fight Israel. And I quote General Avivi saying that in his presentation, when he ended it, he said to the members of the Foreign Affairs and Defense Committee here in Israel that we have to decide if this is going to be a 6-day war, which we initiated knowing that they were going to attack us. And they already took measures. The Egyptians, by closing off the Straits of Tiran and moving into the Sinai Desert, declared war on Israel. It was a de facto war, or casus belli, a reason for war. So we didn't wait around for them to attack us. And on June 5th, 1967, we took the first strike against the Egyptians. So here, Hamas has already declared war against us. And they've been firing missiles against our civilians, which is casus belli. So are we going to have a 6-day war, or are we going to have a Yom Kippur war? And again, going back to what I said and explaining what happened, we had a Yom Kippur war. We were surprised. We didn't initiate, though we had all justification for it. So Israelis, so the IDSF was very clear about that previously, though there was a huge error on the part of the IDSF intelligence. These are things that are going to be investigated after the war. Right now, we have to focus on the battle in front of us, and afterwards look at what were our mistakes and make sure that they don't occur again in the future.
Okay, let me just shift back a little bit to sort of where you see things going in Gaza, and then I'd like to talk to you about the situation in Judea, Samaria, with the Arab population, and then also what you see coming in the north. And then we'll do a little bit about how people can help out from here that might be listening to this, what they can do. So how long do you think, what's your assessment of what's going to happen in Gaza and how long that might take?
Well, it's hard to say. Experts, and I'm not an expert, I'm just quoting the military experts here, and I'm just quoting the Prime Minister, who I believe is getting most of the information. They're saying that this will take a while because the Hamas had 20 years. And as we're discovering more and more intelligence and getting information from their computers that we're uncovering now, they set out with this immediately. From the moment that we withdrew from the Gaza Strip, it took them 2 years to get rid of the. They were voted into power, the Palestinian Authority took control of the Gaza Strip after we withdrew from there. They immediately started firing missiles at Israel, by the way, but that's a different issue right now. 2 years later, they were elected into power, and then they violently kicked out all of the PLO there. So Hamas was in control of the Gaza Strip, and they began immediately preparing, and they knew that they couldn't do this above ground, so they started creating the infrastructure beneath it. We believe that there were several dozen of miles, and we found out now that there's several hundred miles of barracks, 3 levels at times. You had elevators going down there. You had equipment that was unimaginable. This is a huge failure on the part of our intelligence, by the way, that we didn't gather this kind of knowledge, knowing to what extent they went. This was supported. I can give testimony and evidence from my son, from what he saw in his own eyes, in the Rimal neighborhood, which is the affluent neighborhood in the Gaza Strip. And he was saying, he was thinking the Gaza Strip is this refugee camp, these huts and mud. He was stunned to see when you go into the Rimal. Now, I had served in Gaza in the past before we withdrew from there. So I knew that it was, especially Gaza City itself, is very modern and even got more modern over the years. They had high rises, but the rich areas, and as I said before, there were billions of dollars literally being sent in from Europe, from the United Nations, from the United States, from Qatar, billions upon billions, reaching them hundreds of billions of dollars over 20 years. And we know that the 4 leaders of Hamas who are in Qatar today are all billionaires. We know that the head of the Palestinian Authority is a billionaire. His sons are billionaires, literally billionaires in dollar sums. They don't hide it. They don't, they flaunt it even. So, and there are other rich people, all of them connected to Hamas in the Gaza Strip. So while you had these people who obviously lived in refugee camps that they didn't tear down since 1948 and kept them in squalor, but in the Rimal neighborhood, which is about the size of the east side neighborhood of Manhattan, you have pools, buildings and homes that were extravagant. My son said we took over these buildings that were owned by Hamas members, and we stayed in those homes, and they had these wonderful bathrooms and things. There was no water there, so they couldn't use them, but they stayed in their homes, and any place that was connected to Hamas was destroyed by the IDF. Every single one of these places were connected to an underground tunnel. If the places that weren't connected to underground tunnel had arms, munitions in the homes, in the children's rooms. This includes kindergartens, daycare centers, hospitals, UNRWA buildings. Everything had some connection to it. When you went to other homes and other buildings, every place had these maps of the land of Israel, Jerusalem, emblems of Hamas, of the Islamic Jihad, or the Jerusalem brigades of the PLO, the Jerusalem Martyrs brigades. So everybody was connected and supported the terrorism or the battle against the state of Israel, in their words, but they were in one way or another engaged and supported by this. So they had 20 years to build the infrastructure for this. So it's going to take 2 things here. You have the physical aspect, which also breaks down to 2. Physical meaning the positions, the training grounds, the underground tunnels, everything that serves as protection for Hamas. 1. The second thing are the numbers of the Hamas, both those engaged in the physical aspects of it and the leadership. We're going to take out every last one of them. We have killed several thousand up until now. We have taken prisoner over 3,000. There are several thousand of them injured and incapacitated, cannot fight against Israel, and don't have access to hospitals at the moment. And we expect them to surrender as we move forward. But there are also still, as I said, 2 brigades that are still fighting, and we're going to take out every single one of them. Either they surrender or we'll kill them. And the leaders of Hamas that I personally hope we do not take hostage or we do not take prisoner, but we eliminate them. Because personally, I'm against because they said, we'll bring them in, we'll give them trials like they had after World War II, and we'll execute them for what they did in these crimes against humanity. No, because the world they'll become these figures and be upheld as these heroes. No, we take them out because they're scum of the earth and they should die like the dogs they are in the battlefield, and they're quivering and hiding in their tunnels. So I'm hoping that what the Prime Minister said very clearly is, we will eliminate Hamas till the last person. We will kill every one of the Hamas leaders, whether in Gaza or outside of Gaza. As time goes by, every last one of them has a target on their head. We will take them out. So that's what's going to happen there. And it can take months for that to happen. Israel, and the Prime Minister says this, will remain in the Gaza Strip for the foreseeable future until such time, because we have another part, which is the indoctrination of the Gazans there, their indoctrination to hate, to violence, to the dehumanization of the Jews, very much as the Germans were after their control of the Nazi Germany. You had to de-doctrinate them for what they were, the jihad movement that they have in the Gaza Strip. We will remain there and will be in control of Gaza to prevent. Because if we move out of there, those jihadist elements will try to, in some way or another, restore their ability to strike at Israel. Gaza will no longer serve as a base of operations against Gaza. So there we will stay for the foreseeable future. We will not allow the PLO or the Palestinian Authority to restore or be there in any way. And this is the core and the source of, right now, disagreement with the American administration, with the Europeans. The UN we don't care about. The UN can say whatever they want, since they were involved with UNRWA and did nothing to prevent UNRWA from going hand in hand with the terrorist organization. Israel will not let the United Nations be involved in any way in the Gaza Strip. We will be there. We will take care of it until such time that we believe that we can turn it over to some control of some other entity.
So, the stunning thing to me is, I've watched this here as a supporter of Israel. I've been there many times. I mentioned to you, I follow Twitter. I have been shocked. It's like an anti-Israel sewer every day when I open up my Twitter account. It's unbelievable. And there was a shift. Initially, we did this because this is an open air prison. And then within a week, they were like, oh, look at Israel destroying beautiful Gaza and our beach resorts and our shopping malls and that type of thing. And it's hard for me to wrap my head around how vile everything has gotten so quickly. So I want you to know that, that I don't support that. Before we talk about the West Bank and the North, what can we do? So we're sitting here at our keyboards in America. What are some things we can do to help?
Well, you have to understand, I dealt with the public diplomacy aspect, the cognitive warfare for many years. We're at an immediate disadvantage because just by sheer numbers. If we take the Jewish people around the world, and not all of us are on the same page, but let's say we all were, there are about 7 million Jews in the state of Israel. There are about 6 million Jews around the world, 6.5 million Jews around the world. Even if every single one of them was supportive of the state of Israel, 13 million right there. Then if we have the evangelical supporters and Christian supporters of the state of Israel, and those who support Israel, let's say every single one of them supported, about 170 million evangelicals around the world. Again, not all of them are supportive, but let's say they all are. Let's say it's 200 million. So you take 213 million people support Israel unequivocally. There are a billion Muslims around the world. Not only the Arabs, you have them in Indonesia and Malaysia, in Africa. There are there are tens of millions of Muslims in Europe today and in the United States. So we're like outnumbered 10 to 1, even if we take everybody who supposedly supports Israel. So on the numbers, we're at an immediate disadvantage. Also, and one of the things I used to tell when I give a briefing on public diplomacy, I would do the tic-tac-toe and have people play it. And I tell them that anybody over the age of 4 knows that it's an unwinnable situation. If you remember war games, if you're around my age, you remember, shall we play a game? So that it's unbeatable because you have the O's is their arguments, the X's are our arguments, and anybody sitting there, you can't win this. And say there's about, around the world, there are about 5 to 10% support Israel, 15 to 25, maybe 30% support the Arab side. And I say Arab because it's not an Israel-Palestinian war. It's an Arab-Israeli war. One of the smart things they did was turn it from the Arab, which are territory about 3 times the size of the United States, and Israel the size of New Jersey, into a battle of Israel and the Palestinians, which another make-up thing that didn't exist before 1948. They never considered themselves Palestinian. That was the word and the term applied to the Jews who lived in the area of the British Mandate. But that's a long history. We don't even have to go into that. But they shifted the conflict to be those Arabs who identify as Palestinians in the area, which are outnumbered by the Jews. By the way, we're almost similar numbers if you take all those who were Palestinian born after the 1948 war. So it's almost the same as the number of Jews. But they seem to, we're the Goliath in that, and they're the David. So there's 35% who may support them, about 15% who support us. 50% of people around the world usually have no idea what's going on. But here's where I say that social media came to our advantage, though you see, and by the way, you use the word cesspool. One of the reasons I never went into TikTok, not even TikTok, to Twitter, was precisely, TikTok, forget about it, but Twitter is a cesspool. I worked with journalists for many years. They were very much the core of that initially. And knowing who they were, I didn't want to have anything to do with them because I worked very closely with journalists for many years. I didn't even want to be close to any of them. So I never went into Twitter. But I said that it was good that you have civilians in there, because when you have the general public, that's better than even government, because the general public can tell their personal story, give their personal testimony to it. And over time, people see the truth. You can't hide the truth. The truth eventually comes out. And eventually people will see it. If you are a decent human being and you really care about humanity as you claim to, and you open up your eyes and you're not caught up in all this propaganda, eventually I think if people are told the truth, they see it and they weigh it and they can see that we may not be perfect. By the way, one of the attempts to hold Israel to a different standard is anti-Semitism, which goes back for generations. You're talking about what we're going through in academia and in social media. What we're facing today is what Jews face. It's the modern day pogroms. It's that getting riled up with these fantasies about what the Jews have done wrong, and all these stories about blood libels about Jews. And people don't, and then you have the mobs. The mobs today, yes, you do have the physical mobs in the streets of the United States now. By the way, I think it works to their disadvantage, because the fact that they're turning against American symbol of the United States and against America and the West, also in Europe, etc., I think it's waking up to the populations there about the problem that they're facing. But if you go back to the social media, the pogroms going on there against Jews, and in academia, you have an academic pogrom, and that's the most vile thing, because they are supposed to be the bastions of Western values, and yet they succumbed the first. And this was not done by mistake. This was done deliberately to take them out and turn them into this vector of hate towards what the West stands for. And again, Jews being the first in the first line of the battlefield there. So it's nothing unusual. There was sort of a pause for 75 years because of the Holocaust. Some people say, oh, we sort of exaggerated with our hate towards the Jews. The other thing is, because there is the existence of the state of Israel today, and we're not going to back off, and we're not going to hide, and we're not going to cower, and we can defend ourselves. So some people have a problem with that. Well, tough, I'm not going to sacrifice my kids just so some people like me. And I'd rather they not like me. I'd rather, and it's ironic. We had around the same time, last 2 weeks ago, International Holocaust Memorial Day. Well, don't commemorate us. I'd much rather they fear us and fear the wrath of the Jewish people than they commemorate, oh, the poor Jews who were there. that's not me, and not many of us here in the state of Israel. And I say that about, and I do, going back to something you asked before, another thing that we had here in Israel was what an amazing generation we have here. You Americans, till this day, uphold your greatest generation, the World War II generation, and how they stood for the United States and fought there. And till this day, we all hold them dear in our hearts. The Jewish people owe them a great, for what they did, and were able to save those of us who were left there. But we are now experiencing our greatest generation here in the land of Israel. Our kids, we must have done something right, because this Gen Z kids that we made fun of them with their social media and their TikToks and their being on their, oh my God, they've performed in the battlefield on the defense of the people of Israel here unimaginably. And we pat ourselves on the back. We must have done something right, bringing them up right, because they have been beyond anything we could have imagined. So with this, we're making it very clear that anybody who stands on the side of justice and righteousness and good will eventually understand that this is the essence of what we're doing here. So I'm not worried. It'll take time. It always takes time for good people to wake up, because they can't even fathom the horrors and the evil in which we're facing at the moment, because good people can't really understand it. And it's a shame at times, and it's very costly to all of us, but eventually good people do stand up against evil. And I think this will happen eventually here as well.
Well, thank you for that. And so let's just touch briefly, because I know the IDSF has been involved in a lot of research about attitudes, public opinion in different areas of Israel. And I've noticed a lot of, I will be honest with you, I've watched the casualty numbers coming out of Gaza. I am frankly shocked at how, I mean, I know that there's 229, 230 soldiers have fallen since the invasion of Gaza started. But I will be honest with you, having studied this and read, I'm shocked that the number is that low. I mean, the professionalism of the operation has just been stunning to me in limiting casualties to Israeli soldiers. But every death is a major tragedy. I mean, I just saw somebody that popped into my feed on WhatsApp that they announced the death of a couple soldiers just a little while ago in Gaza. And I've been watching a lot of one of the last times I was in Israel, I spent a lot of time in what you would call the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, in Nablus and some other places. So I got to see up close as you mentioned, the refugee camps that are 75 years old that still exist. They keep people living there, yet there will be very modern apartments and homes right next to them. It doesn't make any sense to me. And I've seen a lot of operations into the West Bank since the beginning of the war, probably at a very heightened pace. It doesn't get a lot of press. So what's the feeling of the situation there in the West Bank? Is it a powder keg ready to explode? Is it contained? I know people aren't coming into Israel from those areas to work like they used to. And I know there's a bit of controversy about that within Israeli society, whether that should be restarted. So within the area, what we'll call the West Bank, Judea, Samaria, what do you see happening, or how's that going?
Well, it's clear that it is a powder keg, because the Palestinian Authority, which was given in the Oslo agreements 30 years ago, control over this. And I go back to what I said before, because I remember starting working for the government of Israel back in the 80s. We were told, if you recognize the PLO, there will be peace. And if you withdraw from territories, there'll be peace. We did both of those things. Now, nobody can expect us, and nowhere, and this is again where I go back to what I said previously, the selectively applying of laws. Nowhere in the world has any country that's been attacked been required to restore territory to the assailant. And it's no doubt that the Arabs attacked the state of Israel. And it goes back not only in 1948. United Nations made a decision on the partition of the land here. For whatever the reasons, if you're talking about the legal things, that was the only legal thing that applies to what's going on here. The Arabs were well within their right to reject the UN decision, because it was a UN General Assembly. It wasn't a binding agreement, but they refused it. Israel, the Jewish people accepted it. The Arabs refused it, which was well within their right, according to international law. What was not within their right was to go to war against Israel. At that moment, they violated international law, and they lost. And they lost territory as a consequence. And in this, they lost the right to that territory. This happens in every war since time immemorial, and certainly after World War II. So they keep demanding the right to that land. Now, I tell you again, they outnumber the people of Israel 100-1, not only territorial-wise, also the number-wise. They lost that war. They went to war against us in 1967 again and lost what you call the West Bank. The West Bank implies that it's part of the Kingdom of Jordan. It's not. The area there was for generations called Judea and Samaria, in Hebrew Shomron, which are the geographical terms and the biblical names of those areas. It was from time immemorial. They tried to deny Jewish connection to that area by changing the name. So despite them losing law, we still tried to do this. The PLO was a terrorist organization created with the call for destruction of the state of Israel. Yet despite that, the government, a duly elected government in Israel, decided to go to peace with them. Signed the Oslo agreements, recognizing the PLO, allowing them into the territories of Judea and Samaria, giving them autonomy, hopefully with the hope of eventually creating a state. Now, when you're at war with somebody who is avowed to destroy you, it's going to take time. You want to see if they've changed. Are they going? Anybody would be stupid to say, oh, give them a state. They were tested. They were tested in the Gaza Strip as well. They failed that test. Not because they didn't try, but because they deliberately, and they say this openly. Everything is just, and by the way, the difference between the PLO and Hamas is that the PLO, and they admit this, they believe they should take time, get more territory through the negotiations with Israel, through international pressure on Israel, until such time that they have enough territory to launch a war against Israel to destroy the state of Israel. Hamas said, no, we don't have to wait. We have to fight a war of annihilation against Israel now. 80%, over 80% of people in Judea, of Arabs under the Palestinian Authority polled after October 7th said they support what Hamas did to Israel. 60-some% of them would vote for Hamas if elections were held in Judea and Samaria, in the areas under the Palestinian Authority. If they were to go to elections, the PLO aren't letting them go to elections. But 60 to 70% of Arabs would vote for Hamas. If you talk to them today, even if the Arabs in Rafah at this moment still hold October 7th as a great day in the history of Islam, and they say the only mistake was that they invaded Israel with only 3,000 terrorists and not 300,000. And the next time they won't make that mistake. And just so you know, the cities in Tel Aviv, Kfar Saba, Netanya, all these areas along the border of Israel with the Palestinian Authority are closer than some of the towns to the border with the Palestinians than some of the towns and kibbutzim were that were invaded by Hamas on October 7th. And we're talking about towns and cities of several 100,000 and not several thousand as these towns. And by the way, the Hamas were aiming for Ashkelon, which is a city of over 110,000 citizens. They were stopped by the Israeli Navy that day and stopped by Israeli police who made roadblocks along the road. They were aiming for Beersheba and were stopped by citizens, literally citizens, because one of the members, a member of Knesset from Ben Gvir's party, who used to be a police officer, on that day left his hometown of Afikim and met terrorists on their way to Beersheba. They were on the way to our nuclear power plant. I stress our nuclear power plant near Dimona. They were aiming for that, and from intelligence we gathered since then, for the training bases of infantry soldiers inside the south of Israel. So they were going to move into the Strait of Israel, but two things stopped them. First off, the police and citizens of Israel who were armed. And by the way, a lesson to be learned about Americans: don't give up on your Second Amendment right, because one of the things we were able to do, although it was just pistols, we didn't have heavy weapons, and that's why we had a lot of casualties that day from the battles, because the terrorists were armed to the teeth. We only had pistols for people who dropped everything and went to face them in the streets, but we were able to limit their ability to move forward. That was the one thing that stopped them, was that, and the second thing that stopped them was they got caught. They discovered this music festival and got caught up in a whole day of murder and rape and violence against them. So they got caught up in that, diverted attention from moving straight in Israel. They'll not make that mistake in the future. And they say this. And when you go into these towns that are under the control of the Palestinian Authority in Jenin, Tulkarem, Shechem, which is the name of Nablus. I don't use the name Nablus because Nablus is an Arab perversion of the name Neapolis, which is the name the Roman Empire gave to the town of Shechem, which was the core of the Israel kingdom at that time. And the first place that Abraham came into the land of Israel was Shechem. The Romans wanted to erase our connection to it, called it Neapolis. The Arabs can't pronounce P, so they call it Nablus. Just as well as ask them what the meaning of Palestine is in Arabic, it has no meaning. There is no meaning to Palestine. They call it Philistine or Palestine. It means nothing in Arabic. So again, another word that they use to erase Jewish connection in the way that the Romans wanted them to do. But not being facetious anymore, going back to what's going on. These areas that are under control of the PLO have become terrorist hotbeds, either by Hamas or by those Islamic Jihad or PLO terrorists that are connected to the Palestinian Authority. They're encouraged by the PLO because they have this pay for slave. Anybody involved or killed or in jail that was involved in terrorism against Israeli civilians is paid money. And it's now reaching over $100 million a year. So they ask for international support and help, and they then divert money. Instead of helping these refugees and getting them out of their squalor, they keep people who murdered children and women and civilians, which is a crime against humanity, though it's not applied to them. They're quick to take us to Israel to The Hague, but after the Arabs have been conducting wars and crimes against humanity, even their missiles firing at a civilian location, nobody's taking them to court or even questioning that. Right. And then when we defend ourselves, that's being questioned. So the same thing is happening in Judea and Samaria. We know very well that they're looking and using October 7th as an example. We're not playing that game anymore. We're not going to let that happen anymore. And it's not only the government, it's the people of Israel again. And therefore, as you were saying, there were over 100,000 Arabs from the Gaza Strip and 250,000 Arabs from Judea and Samaria under the Palestinian Authority control that were finding employment in Israel. The Gazans used many of these people who got employment by Israelis to spy on Israeli bases, on civilians, on the homes, to know exactly where people were living, who were armed, and people were employed for 20 years in Israeli towns and villages and turned against them on that day. So we can't afford this to happen with Judea and Samaria. And by the way, we owe them nothing. How many Japanese, even American citizens who were of Japanese descent, were put into camps in World War II because of the concern of the Americans, good or evil, it's regardless. The fact was that it was a logical idea because they were concerned that they may be allying with the Japanese, who were your sworn enemy at the time. So I don't want to go into the historical aspect of it or evaluate it in any way, but it's a normal concern of human beings that when you have an enemy, until such time as you know that they're not, that you take action. So here we're not putting them into camps. We're just not going to let them be employed inside the state of Israel anymore. The citizens don't want that. Citizens don't want that. So in Israel. So in Judea and Samaria, they're going to have to find employment elsewhere. And it's going to be costly to our country because there were a lot of people that were employed there, and they do the menial labor and work in the fields and in construction and all. But we'll find people from around the world to do this. Well, the Israelis will do that. Already now, the farms, since October 7th, you have volunteers from the United States who are working in the farms here, and you have Israeli citizens who are taking time off and working on the farms to make sure that our agriculture continues. So this is part of the battle going on, part of the battle the Israeli citizens are aware of and realize is going to be a period of hardship, but the alternative is much worse. And since we cannot trust the Palestinian Authority, we cannot trust the PLO, they're not doing anything to stop. We're not going to let Hamas embed itself in these cities and towns as they did in the Gaza Strip. And as we know, by the way, Hezbollah have been doing in South Lebanon as well.
Yeah. So let's just talk. So I know it's a very, very difficult situation. I would refer everybody, please go sign up at the IDSF website and get the daily briefings at 10 a.m. Eastern every day for 30
By
minutes.
the way, sorry to interrupt you, but if you miss it live, it's taped. And if you register for it, you'll get a link to see it at your leisure. So,
right. By the way, there is an IDSF YouTube channel now too, where
right.
you can get all the briefings as well. So I highly recommend those. So let's just talk. I know I'm a little bit over time that we talked about earlier, which is not unusual for what I do. What do you see happening in the north with the Lebanon border? I know the concern always was, watching intelligence and security briefings for years, that the big problem for Israel was the Lebanon border because of how embedded Hamas and other Iranian-backed groups are up there along the Lebanon and Syrian borders, and that the tunnel system up there might be more sophisticated than what you thought was in Gaza. What's the thinking about what's going to happen with regard to the Lebanon border?
Again, it's hard to say, and you don't say in Hebrew that after the fall of the Second Temple, the prophecy was given to fools. So I can only base on assumptions and what we see happening and where it could go, with their worst case scenario or best case scenario. Need to stress something here. A lot of the self-righteous people strutting around the New York City, Washington, capitals and cities in Europe keep talking about ceasefire this, ceasefire that. And I say, and I'm very, I say about them being self-righteous in a very derogatory term, because there was a ceasefire here. Hamas violated the ceasefire. In March, there was an exchange between Israel and Hamas, and we limited ourselves again there, didn't go to war because there was a ceasefire in place. With Hezbollah, we had a war with Hezbollah. It's called the Second Lebanon War, but it's not Lebanon. Our battle is with Hezbollah. And the war with Hezbollah back over 15 years ago, in 2008, I believe, was against Hezbollah, and we were able to push them away from the border with Israel. And eventually, there was UN Resolution 1701, which put in a ceasefire with Hezbollah in South Lebanon. They were supposed to move back, and this again goes to all these international guarantees that Israel get. We had international guarantees regarding Oslo and we gave up territory. We recognized the PLO. We allowed them in the territories next to us in return for promises that were guaranteed by the Europeans and the United States that there wouldn't be violence. They violated that. They still have control of these territories. Where are our guarantors? Now, for example, in Judea and Samaria, the territory was divided into 3 areas, one under Arab control, one under joint control, and one under Israeli control. And now the Europeans are encouraging the PLO to build construction along the border with Israel in areas they were not supposed to be in violation of their commitments to Israel as the guarantors. Same thing in South Lebanon. They moved in UN forces who have been expelled from South Lebanon since then in violation of the agreement, and yet Israel didn't use this as an excuse to attack them. Now, Hezbollah control Lebanon today. Maybe they didn't do that in 2008, but today they control Lebanon. And Lebanese have to understand, and I do say this, if you have friends, relatives in Lebanon, make them see the pictures in Gaza Strip. Take a very good look at it. Every house that no longer exists there, every town center that no longer exists there, every building, this could be Lebanon. This will be Lebanon if we do go to war. Right now, we have been very restrained, despite Hezbollah firing at us. By the way, nobody talks about the over 200,000 Israelis who have been displaced since October 7th, moved out from the north of Israel into hotels and areas in the center and south of Israel, away from the border, because the north of Israel right now for over 4 months has been unlivable. Nobody has been demonstrating in the streets about that. Nobody has been criticizing Lebanon because of that. again, the selective applying of international law. So in Lebanon at the moment, it's growing. Now, there's a bigger picture. It's not just Hamas and Hezbollah. Everything here is part of the proxy war that is being run by Iran. And there's also in Syria that people don't know about, you had Shia elements from Afghanistan and Iraq who have been trained by Iran. We know today from information that we got, intelligence that we gathered from Gaza Strip, that the Nukhba soldiers, terrorists who fought against Israel on that day, who attacked Israel, were trained by Iran. You have the Houthis in South Yemen, who are also trained by Iran, who are now attacking Western traffic of ships and the United States and Britain. These are all being constructed and controlled by Iran. So everything here eventually points to Iran. They're conducting war and warfare against the West through these proxies. Israel is the first bastion of West in the Middle East. That's why we are the first target. So with Lebanon, we've made it very clear. And right now there are attempts to reach some kind of agreement. Israel has agreed recently that they won't have to go back 10 kilometers. It'll only be 7 kilometers. All sorts of things that are in violation of the agreement that we signed 15 years ago. Hezbollah rejected it just the other day. So right now, I can tell you this, knowing from my experience in combat and over the years with government, it's winter here. Winter is not a good time to go to war. Despite being in the Middle East, Lebanon is very European in its weather and very European in the kind of in its atmosphere there, very different than the rest of the Arab world. But Lebanon also has snow and is mountainous. And though we've had very good weather the past few days, very spring-like, there could suddenly, you don't know what's going to happen 10 days from now, 2 weeks from now. It could be snowy, which makes it very difficult to conduct efficient warfare. Now, you mentioned before about the small number of casualties that Israel had in its warfare in Gaza Strip, which also the West Point expert on urban warfare said that he was very surprised the low number that we've been able to sustain there because of the professionalism by our soldiers and our commanders. But there's also been another thing that's unparalleled in Western warfare, which is the small number of civilians killed in what is going on in Gaza and especially in Lebanon at the moment. There have been no civilians as far as we know, and don't tell me about journalists, because the journalists there in South Lebanon, very much like the journalists employed by Al Jazeera and by Western in Gaza Strip, they're all connected to Hezbollah and all combatants. Because in an area controlled by terrorists, you don't have journalists walking around freely. They control everything. It's not a Western country. And even if the same thing happens in Arab countries, you can't just walk around freely. You also always have to be escorted. But when you're not escorted, that means you're an operative. So I'm not taking them, but civilians in the Gaza Strip, you've had less than 10% of the population killed. This is about half of what Western casualties are usually when they engage in warfare in civilian areas and in urban warfare. So the same thing in Lebanon. We'll try to apply that. We'll try to be careful. But Hezbollah are much stronger. And they have divisions and military and have embedded themselves in towns, villages in Lebanon, very much the way that Hamas did in Gaza, but much more. You had an explosion a few years ago that everybody sees on social media, this big explosion that went down in Beirut. Some of them applied this to Gaza, as if they have what we call Pallywood that they do in the Gaza Strip. They have these actors. If things are so terrible, why do they have to do actors and bringing pictures from what was done to Arabs in refugee camps in Syria, or this explosion in Beirut, which was a Hezbollah warehouse in the port of Beirut, which exploded a few years ago. It was almost like a nuclear explosion. That's how much weapons they had there. So we know that and these kind of things, we know where they're at. We have, as you can see, what's going on in Syria and what's going on in Lebanon in the past year. In the past 4 months, we have more accurate and precise information about their positions there and what's going on there. and we will take out these things. We're reluctant to do it right now because it will cause damage to the infrastructure of the Lebanese. So I don't see us, unless there's a mistake, or Hezbollah and Iran. And by the way, Iran are much more reluctant to lose Hezbollah. They've lost Hamas, they know it, but Hamas are Shia. Hezbollah are Sunni. They're not Persian, but they have they're much more affiliated to Islam because they share the same religion, the Shia version of Islam. So they'd rather not lose them, and they're far more experienced, and they use them in other battles that they're conducting against the Sunni around the Middle East. So they don't want to lose them, and they're not encouraging them to go to war with Israel. But we're not going to sit around knowing what we faced with Hamas, where Israel is not going to wait for Hezbollah to be prepared and ready to go war with us. They've lost over 100, and I think over 200 of their combatants and terrorists over the past 4 months, which is a huge blow to them.
Including a lot of their leadership.
Right. We will strike them with in Gaza, we used 3 divisions out of, I don't want to say how many we have. We've kept most of our reservists along the border with Lebanon, knowing that the abilities of Hezbollah are much greater than those of Hamas. But we will also use much more than we've used with Hamas. We will be ruthless with them, and it includes Syria and any place where the Iranians are based if we go to war. So right now, we will wait till spring. But if there's not, look, even if there is an international agreement, it has to be such that disarms Hezbollah, because we can't wait for them to go to war when they're ready against us. We've learned October 7th is a red letter date for us. We know what's going on there. So probably in March or April, you will see things escalating with Hezbollah, unless there's some agreement. But I can tell you very clearly that under that agreement, we will make it very clear that if at any point that it is violated, we'll not go back to what we've had in the past 20 to 30 years here with the PLO and with Hezbollah in Lebanon. It will not be a tit for tat kind of exchange, but we will use the moment they violate that agreement, the agreement is finished as far as we're concerned. And we will forever be. Now, they've already discussed the fact that our mandatory service will be increased to 3.5 years for soldiers, and this includes men and women. Reserves will be now from the age of 40 to the age of 45. We'll be doing, instead of 12 days a year reserve duty, we'll be doing around 40 days a year. We're going back to the way things were 30 to 40 years ago. And the citizens of Israel understand that right now, because for us, it's a question of survival. And if we're going to have to give up on some of the good life that we've enjoyed here for many years, we'll sacrifice that, because the alternative is something we cannot bear.
Well, sobering information, but very truthful and to the point. I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. I will put a link to the IDSF website in the show description. And any final thoughts, Danny, you want to share with us?
I was very sobering, because these are sobering times for us here. We all, as I said, we haven't stopped to mourn, but we carry daily pain and sorrow for the good people that we lost. We lost a lot of good people. The horrific situation of those being held as hostages right now, even though we succeeded in freeing 2 of them yesterday, and hopefully we'll be able to free others. But just seeing, if you saw the images of those young women who they released a few weeks ago, you look at their eyes, just think of what they're going through day after day, and every single one of us here in Israel. I tell you, not a day goes by that I don't look at children in the streets here and think about the babies that were butchered that day, and I don't see young women working in the bars and in the restaurants here, and think about those young women the same age who are being held, and just thinking of what they're going through at the moment. But at the same time, many of us here, when you hear a lot of the soldiers left letters for their families, and they say to them, don't mourn. just the heroism of these young men and women, that they say, I fell for a good cause. I defended my country. I fought for my country. And if I had to make that ultimate sacrifice, it's so that my nieces and nephews and my younger brothers and sisters and future generation of Israelis can live freely. And I see the parents of some of them. I interviewed the woman who lost her son in a tragic situation. He was being held captive and he was able to free himself. And unfortunately, the soldiers there identified him as a threat and he was killed. And Iris Chaim is her last name. Chaim in Hebrew is life. And she says, no, she can sit and mourn and suffer, but no, she comes and gives a message to Israelis and to the soldiers who were involved in this tragic incident. And she says to them, and she's so strengthening to so many of us. And others, the families who have their relatives and their family and their children being held right now in Gaza, and they say, no, we're not backing off, and we don't want anybody to mourn right now. We're a strong country. We should be grateful for everything that we have. And as I said here several times, we are no longer those helpless Jews who had been under pogroms in the past. My family on my mother's side came here from Afghanistan over 100 years ago because they heard that Jews were returning, that the prophecies were being realized, and Jews were indeed returning as it was prophesied. And we've made here a country that they could have never imagined. So we enjoyed a few years of relative peace and calm, but our situation is much better than generations of Jews beforehand, because we do have the land of Israel and we do have our freedoms. We should never, and this is our message, just like our Bible was the message to people around the world, and Christians have taken this and are spreading that word around the world as well, that the state of Israel should be an image for the rest of the world to see that when you take what the freedoms that you were given, when you take the goodness that is in our religions, the Judeo-Christian heritage, and you apply that goodness to a nation, it's endless what you can do and what you can succeed in. Don't let anybody else to try to take the perversions that they try to apply and impose upon us and our children. And stand strong in your beliefs, stand strong in what you understand. And as an American, I'm grateful to live in the state of Israel as a Jew, but I grew up in the United States. And I will always be grateful for that opportunity that was given to me and for my grandparents that came to the United States from Europe. And my dad converted to Judaism. So to me, Christianity is not only a religion, it's family. And I'm grateful for my family that lived in the United States and brought me up believing in the goodness and the righteousness and the American way of life. Never give that up, because the Americans, the United States, is the hope to the rest of the world. We survive here. It would have been much more difficult for us in this battle had we not had the United States and its belief in righteousness and the cause of justice. So I finish with this saying to you, yes, good people have to go through through difficult times, and we're in one of those times right now. But we're succeeding, and we're standing up to it, and we're flourishing. And don't forget that, and use us as an example to stand strong and understand that good defeats evil eventually. And as we defeat them here, we will make sure that our lives are better and your lives will be better as well. And the sacrifice, never forget the sacrifice. Never forget the sacrifice of those who are willing to give the ultimate so that we can live in freedom. And that means that we not only have a memory, but we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility as long as we live, never to forget that sacrifice and what they were willing to lay down their lives for, and never to take it for granted.
I think that's a good place to end. Danny, we'll keep Israel and you and your colleagues at the IDSF in our thoughts and prayers, and look forward to following up with you again in the near future. Thanks so much.
Thank you.